In the last section, we finished going through both of our configuration files, and we're now ready to load these into our Kubernetes cluster and try to access our running container. So in order to do so, we're going to feed both these configuration files into our cluster through the kubectl command line tool. The command in particular that we're going to run is the apply command. So at the command line, we're going to run kubectl apply -f, and then the name of a configuration file, or I should say the path to the configuration file. Now, kubectl, again, that's a command line tool that we use to mess around with everything going on inside of our Kubernetes cluster. The apply keyword means that we want to change the configuration of our cluster, and that's actually kind of a very loaded term. Like these words right here, change the current configuration. That's a real loaded term right there, and it's something that we're going to expand upon at great length in just a little bit. We then specify that we want to load in a file that contains all this configuration that we care about. So we're going to add on the -f flag, and then the path to the file is the path to the file. That's pretty much it. So let's try flipping over to our command line, and we're going to run this command 2 times, one time for the client pod.yaml file, and one time for the client nodeport.yaml file. So back in my terminal, I'm going to first make sure that I'm inside of my simple k8s directory, which is where I have those 2 configuration files. I'll then run kubectl apply -f, and let's first load up the client pod. So I'll say client-pod.yaml. I'll hit enter, and then we'll very quickly see that the pod has been configured. Now, what does configured mean? Who knows? That seems a little bit mysterious. So it doesn't really seem to say that the pod was or the container was successfully created. And in fact, this message printed up a little bit too quickly for me to really feel like the container was successfully created. So we might need to do a little bit of a status check here in just a second to make sure that the pod was in fact started up successfully. But before we do, let's apply our other configuration file. So I'll do kubectl apply -f, and then the other file was called client node port. So client node port.yaml. And again, I see configured message right here. Now again, in both cases, it seems like these messages appeared pretty quickly, so I don't really know if everything worked the way we would expect. So let's try figuring out how we can print out the status of both these different objects that we just created, and just make sure that they were in fact successfully created. So in order to get the status of any different object that you and I create through a configuration file or any other means, we're going to be making use of the kubectl get command. The get command is going to print out the status of an entire group of object types. So for example, we would say kubectl get pods. In this case, pods is the type of object that we want to get information about. kubectl will look at our Kubernetes cluster, it'll find all the different pods that have been created, and it'll print out the status of every single one. So it's a very easy way to get a kind of high-level look at everything that's going on inside of your cluster. So I'll do kubectl get pods,